Compare two people. Person 1 has an LDL of 200, triglycerides of 200, and HDL of 35. Using milligrams per deciliter, the triglyceride to HDL ratio is approximately 5.7. Person 2 has the same LDL of 200, but triglycerides of 45 and HDL of 85. The ratio is approximately 0.5. The LDL value is identical, but does anyone honestly believe that these two laboratory patterns describe the same metabolic condition? So why is this simple ratio still missing from our dyslipidemia guidelines? Peace be upon you, and welcome back to Mind Human. I'm Dr. Haitham Faraj, a cardiologist, a certified nutritionist, and a personal trainer. Small dense LDL is frequently associated with insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, visceral obesity, fatty liver, higher triglycerides, low HDL, and metabolic syndrome. Large point LDL is frequently seen within a very different phenotype. Lower triglycerides, higher HDL, better insulin sensitivity, less visceral fat, and lower inflammatory burden. That is why I do not believe that a large point LDL particle circulating in a lean, insulin-sensitive, low-inflammatory person should automatically be given the same biological meaning as small dense LDL circulating in a diabetic patient with metabolic syndrome. This is where the triglyceride to HDL ratio becomes extremely useful. The ratio can act as a simple window into the metabolic environment surrounding the LDL particles. When triglycerides rise and HDL falls, the patient becomes more likely to have insulin resistance, triglyceride-rich remnant particles, and a predominance of smaller, denser LDL. Studies have shown that triglyceride to HDL correlates inversely with the LDL particle size and can help predict pattern B. Other studies and meta-analysis have associated a higher ratio with insulin resistance, subclinical atherosclerosis, and future cardiovascular events. This is why I included the triglyceride to HDL ratio in my hidden heart risk assessment. I use it as a practical metabolic warning signal, not as a standalone diagnosis. A ratio above approximately 2, when calculated using milligrams per deciliter, should make us look more deeply, while a ratio around 1.4 or lower is generally a more favorable sign. But these are practical clues, not universal diagnostic cutoffs. This brings me to an important question. Why is the triglyceride to HDL ratio still not formally included as a cardiovascular risk enhancer in the new dyslipidemia guidelines? The guidelines recognize persistently elevated triglycerides. They already recognized low HDL as part of cardiovascular kidney metabolic syndrome. They recognize diabetes, hsCRP, ApoB, lipoprotein(a), and abdominal obesity. But the triglyceride to HDL ratio itself is still not listed as a formal risk enhancer or treatment target in the guidelines risk enhancer table. There are possible explanations. First, there is no universally accepted cutoff. Second, the numerical result changes depending on whether the values are calculated in milligrams per deciliter or millimoles per liter. Third, predictive thresholds may differ according to sex, ethnicity, and population. And finally, we do not yet have randomized trials demonstrating that treating of a patient toward a specific triglyceride to HDL target reduces cardiovascular events. Those are reasonable limitations, but absence from a guideline does not make a marker clinically meaningless. Triglyceride to HDL is inexpensive. It is available on almost every standard lipid profile. It reflects the relationship between two metabolically connected variables, and it can provide a useful clue about insulin resistance and small dense LDL without requiring expensive particle testing. That is why I believe this ratio deserves much greater attention. And this subject is also personal to me. Years ago, I was overweight, metabolically unhealthy, and had elevated LDL. I initially lost weight through severe calorie restriction and excessive cardio. My weight dropped, my LDL dropped, but I also lost muscle, strength, and mental clarity. I became lighter, but I was not necessarily healthier. When I shifted toward resistance training, nutrient-dense food, and a more sustainable lifestyle, my muscle mass, strength, and metabolic health improved, and my LDL rose again. But now it existed alongside lower triglycerides, higher HDL, less visceral fat, and a pattern more consistent with predominantly large buoyant LDL. That experience forced me to ask, was the LDL number alone truly describing my health? And as it turns out, researchers are now studying a similar metabolic pattern in a group known as lean mass hyperresponders. What is a lean mass hyperresponder? Some lean individuals develop a dramatic rise in LDL after adopting a very low carbohydrate or ketogenic diet. But instead of developing the classical pattern of metabolic syndrome, they often show very high LDL, high HDL, very low triglycerides, and a very low triglyceride to HDL ratio. They are generally lean and insulin sensitive, with little visceral fat and few obvious signs of metabolic dysfunction. This phenotype has become known as the lean mass hyperresponder, or LMHR phenotype. They are generally lean, physically active or insulin sensitive, and show few conventional signs of metabolic dysfunction. The proposed research definition includes an LDL of at least 200, an HDL of at least 80, and triglycerides no higher than 70 milligrams per deciliter. These individuals commonly develop LDL levels above 200 or 300, and exceptionally high values above 500 milligrams per deciliter have also been documented. But notice what happens to their triglyceride to HDL ratio. If triglycerides are 50 and HDL is 90, the ratio is only 0.56. That is the opposite of typical insulin-resistant small dense LDL pattern. Why might LDL rise in these individuals? One proposed explanation is called the Lipid energy model. When a lean person dramatically restricts carbohydrates, the body becomes more dependent on fat for energy. The liver packages triglycerides into VLDL particles and sends them into the circulation. Muscle and other tissues remove the triglyceride cargo to use it as a fuel. The remaining particles are then remodeled and may eventually become LDL. According to this hypothesis, the high LDL reflects increased fat energy transport and lipoprotein turnover, not necessarily the same pathology that produces a high triglyceride to HDL ratio and small dense LDL insulin resistance. This mechanism remains a hypothesis, but the phenotype itself is documented and deserves proper investigation rather than immediate dismissal. But what do the coronary arteries of these individuals actually look like? In the next episode, we will examine the 2024 Keto CTA study. It included 80 lean, metabolically healthy individuals whose average LDL was approximately 272 milligrams per deciliter, and one participant had an LDL of 591 milligrams per deciliter. The question is, did their coronary imaging show the amount of plaque that this extremely high LDL would normally lead us to expect? We will also examine studies of exceptionally healthy elderly individuals in Sardinia, China, and Japan, where relatively higher LDL was associated with longer survival, and ask what these populations can teach us about cholesterol, metabolic health, and longevity. Could very high LDL coexist with clean arteries and healthy longevity? And what does that mean for the way we interpret cholesterol? Now tell me in the comments below, do you believe an LDL of 300 in a lean mass hyperresponder carries the same risk as an LDL of 300 in a patient with diabetes, visceral obesity, and metabolic syndrome? And why do you think the triglyceride to HDL ratio is still missing from the guidelines? Please like the video and subscribe to MenHuman for evidence-based health, where we look beyond symptoms and laboratory targets to identify and address the underlying causes of disease. You can also complete my free hidden heart risk assessment through the link in the description below. It will help you examine important metabolic and inflammatory clues that a standard LDL result may overlook. That's it for today. Until next time, peace be upon you. Assalamu alaikum.
Subscribe to MenHuman!